Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. We're winding down the end of the year now, and we're in a slow time for the year of bodybuilding. The closest show we have now is the Arnold Classic in a couple of months, and with the Olympia and the last shows of 2023 several weeks behind us now, we don't have too much to talk about. So before I start gearing up for my Arnold Classic coverage and the comparisons I want to do and all of that, and now that I'm done with the Olympia videos that I've wanted to do, I want to do a couple of fun comparisons. Comparisons that don't have any real relevance to what's currently happening in the sport, and may not even have to do with today's competitors. I just have some ideas kicking around in my head that I want to put out, and I think now would be a good time to do these comparisons in other videos. In today's video, we're going to compare one of the absolute greats in terms of modern mass with class aesthetics against two of the newer guys who are trying to fill those same very big shoes. I'm of course talking about Cedric McMillan, Andrew Jacked, and Samson Dowda. Now we all know Cedric is no longer with us, and that is a tragedy. And believe me, I mean absolutely no disrespect by doing this comparison. Cedric is one of the greats, we all know this, and if you forgot how good he was, you'll definitely be reminded by the end of this comparison. Like I said, this comparison is just for fun, but also in great reverence for Cedric. So I actually want to focus on the changing of the guard aspect in this video. Cedric walked in that mass with class lane so these guys like Samson and Andrew could run. And now we have even more guys occupying that same lane. And really Cedric was one of the first ones to do that in the 2010s, where at the time there were bubble guts galore. So all these guys are very similar. These are guys that have good size but also great aesthetics. They're all very tall for bodybuilding, and they actually care about posing. So let's go ahead and see how the mass with class archetype has changed over time using the all-time great Cedric McMillan and putting him against Samson Dowda and Andrew Jacked. For this comparison, since it's very casual, I went ahead and decided to use everyone's best versions. For Andrew Jacked, that was an easy one to pick. It was the 2023 Texas Pro quite easily at this point in his career. For Samson, I could have went with his more recent 2023 Prague Pro, but I went with the 2023 Arnold win, where he was very similar, but there was better lighting there, so overall I think it's better to do the Arnold. Cedric's was a little bit harder to choose. I could have used any of his 7 regular Pro Show wins, or his 2017 Arnold Classic winning version, but for my money I went with something a little unorthodox. After comparing and looking over so many contests, I'm going with the 2019 Arnold Classic Australia version, where he placed second. It was a bit later into his career, but he wasn't losing any major amounts of size yet, and he was shredded at the show, which he struggled with a lot in his career. Not to mention the lighting at the show was amazing. So we'll be using those versions for these 3 athletes, but that's enough intro. I've gone on long enough, but if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. The first couple of poses will be the hardest to judge, as all of these guys are bringing some of the most aesthetic versions of these poses I've seen in the modern era. The front double really requires you both to have great arms and, just as importantly, a good X-frame. Well, tick both boxes off for each gentleman really. All of these poses are great, but I gotta try to narrow this down first before picking a winner. I guess you could probably make an argument for any guy winning, but I do think Samson's argument would be the weakest. His arms are the weakest in this lineup, and I think he's a little underdeveloped in the upper body. Cedric has more muscle and is more thickly developed up top, as well as the arms, and equals Samson's aesthetics. Now, Andrew Jacked is the lightest of the bunch, but he's leaning so heavily into aesthetics that it can almost be forgiven. I still think Samson is kind of in the middle between fully developed bodybuilder and pure aesthetics. That's really only in the upper body though, and the arms, because those legs are the best out of the lineup. But anyway, those are my arguments for Samson being third. I get that they're not that compelling, but this pose is incredible for everyone, so I do have to nitpick. Now, between Cedric and Andrew, we have someone that is giving up several pounds but looks like a statue against someone who looks a little less like a statue but is more developed. I see this one truly as a flip of a coin. One day I could prefer Cedric over Andrew for the better development, but today Andrew's aesthetics won me over. Again, we're nitpicking, but I like a couple of things more on Andrew. The first one really goes without saying, but it's the midsection. Andrew's midsection just ties everything together so neatly. Cedric's midsection in the front double was always a little messy, if you asked me. I would prefer his pose a little bit more if his abs were a little bit more defined, but again, this is a nitpick. I also actually prefer Andrew's arms. He really needs to close up his arms more in posing, but I prefer the shape of his biceps over Cedric's. And finally, I prefer Andrew's quads a little more just due to the greater amount of sweep. All of these guys are so impressive when you look at them. Again, I could have anyone, but without getting too in depth, I'm having my ranking be Andrew in first, then Cedric, and Samson. No one is a loser here though. It's more or less the same story going to the front lat spread. Aesthetic guys do the best, and all of these guys are literal legends in that regard. Still though, I think this pose is Andrew's. Probably even more easily for him here than in the front double. I could have gone back and forth on the front double a little bit more, but here Andrew is firmly in my first place. His lats are insane, probably the best on stage, at least right there with Cedric. But I do like the shape and taper of Andrew's a little bit more. They insert a bit lower. And then Andrew also has those finer details. His pecs are surprisingly thick here, and he's got more striations here too Andrew compared to anyone else. And those abs are always going to be the cherry on top of any pose he gets to display them in, because his midsection is yet again the best in this pose. In going downstairs, I think I like his legs here just as much as I do Samson's. I guess maybe I overall like Samson's a little bit more because Andrew has a slight imbalance between his quads, but still both of them have better sweep and details than Cedric's legs, and Andrew is matching Samson in a lot of ways. And with those huge lats I talked about and his huge sweeping quads, he's built the best X-frame on stage, but with those extra details. It's very hard for me to see an argument for anyone else in this pose when Andrew is winning all of those elements. I think a lot of people would probably go with Cedric next. His lats are better over Samson and he still cuts a good outline, but for my money I'm going with Samson. This is really because of the overall outline. I don't know what it is, but my eyes are just drawn to a better outline in this pose every single time. And Samson has better legs over Cedric, he has more sweep most importantly, and Cedric's legs, while detailed, need more size and sweep to balance out his wide upper body. Samson doesn't have that problem, and he has the much better X-frame because he's more complete top to bottom, even though he's getting beaten lats. And at least for me, I like a good outline in this pose just as much as I do crazy lats. But if you want better developed lats, you can probably go with Cedric here. He still looks very statuesque, and again, no one in this pose is really losing, but I still have to rank them at least loosely, and Samson is really catching my eye here the most next to Andrew, so he gets the nod for second place. The side chest is a surprisingly more competitive shot than I thought it would be. Now I say surprisingly mainly because of Andrew jacked. I thought he would be in a clear third here because on paper at other shows he needs to have more thickness overall. He needs more muscularity and he tends to fall off in the lower body, the hamstrings specifically. But taking a look here, the size discrepancy is not as apparent as I thought it would be. Now is he as thickly as developed as the other guys? Still, no. Just because that size discrepancy is a little bit smaller here doesn't mean it's still not a factor. But he makes up for it a little bit with some great fullness and 3D muscle bellies. I mean, look at the pecs, the delts, the arms, they look like they're jumping off the bone. And he has good details in those pecs too. And his other major flaw, the lower body also looks the most balanced I've seen it at any show. You can't look at his side leg and tell me he needs more size in the hams. I think everything fits together quite perfectly here. Like I said, he has a very balanced look. Still, even with all of this said, you can tell that Cedric and Samson are still overpowering him in size, but I think he fits in fairly well. Now, if all three of these guys were side by side, I think the size discrepancy would be a bit more apparent, but since we're dealing with pictures, I think that helps Andrew a little bit. Even with looking better here than his other versions, I think he brings a great pose, but I still gotta put him in third. This doesn't mean Andrew isn't competitive, but zooming out and looking at the size advantage of the other two and the better polish, I still see a very, very small line in the sand between these two, between the other two, and Andrew. He looks great, but the other guys do seem to be in a bit of a higher tier. Now, looking at those other two guys, I'm hard-pressed to pick a winner. For the pecs, it's Samson. I really don't think Cedric's angle is helping him here, and he should have turned to the side more to showcase his thickness, but still, Samson's pecs are quite the mountains to topple. I wish Samson had more detail though. Cedric beats him in that aspect at least. So Samson wins the pecs as a whole, but honestly, I think I have Cedric everywhere else. The delt and the arm, they're no contest. The upper arms need to be filled out a little bit more for Samson, and he's getting beat in both mass and detail here by Cedric quite easily. Cedric also wins the midsection too for what it's worth. Samson's still good, it's not like he has a bubble gut or anything, but Cedric's abs are a little bit drier and he has more oblique detail. Now with the lower body, you can take your pick. There are similar levels of size going on here, but the condition is the main difference here. Samson has the thick skin going on, especially in the lower body, but he still probably has a little bit more detail somehow. Cedric has a deep and clear cut between the quad and ham, but he has nothing going on in the glutes. I think for all intents and purposes, this area is a trade-off, but call me crazy, I actually like Cedric a bit more with his cleaner separation. This pose is going to come down to how much you weight the pecs in your own judging. If they're more important to you than anything else by a mile, then you'll probably go with Samson on this one, and one definitely can't argue. But I'm here again with another controversial call, and I actually like Cedric for first place here. Unlike Andrew jacked, I think if these two guys did stand next to each other on the same stage, it would be a lot closer, and that benefits Cedric more. I do also think Cedric's picture and angles do not do him any favors. I even went and looked at other photos from other contests of him doing the side chest, and he's usually more opened up and displays even more mass in the pecs. So I think with a different photo angle, or if these guys were actually next to each other, Cedric would fare a lot better. But even just based on these two picks, I think since the level of mass is pretty similar, even somewhat similar in the pecs, but Cedric is more complete with those finer details, I like him more. He loses in the pecs, sure, but he doesn't lose anywhere else really. And he has those overarching themes like better condition and the polish, and more overall thickness in the entire physique from the side. I think he looks picture perfect in the shot with less flaws compared to Samson. Samson had the weaker arms, delts, and is less conditioned, which is why I have to put him in a close second, with Cedric taking this pose. Finally, when we turn these guys around for the rear double, we have some pretty easy to figure placings. I gotta put Samson in a pretty distant third. His back is just too narrow and too smooth. He's sharper than Andrew, but Andrew has a little bit more going on in the back still. Samson doesn't have the thickness and pop like Andrew does to poke through his thicker skin. I think we can all agree Samson is very underwhelming in the back and is getting an easy last place here. Then I see Andrew in a clear second, kind of by default. He's still good, but Cedric takes the cake on this one easily. Andrew has a good back. He's very wide and has a decent amount of detail, but he still needs to be sharper. Being sharper and revealing even more details alone would probably put him over Cedric in the back department, but we judge what we can see. And then when you take a gander downstairs, Andrew really falls off. The problem of poor conditioning is really on display here. The glutes are starting to show striations, but not enough, and the hamstrings don't showcase a single cut. And that's not just because of his poor condition, it's also because Andrew just straight up needs more hams to begin with. He was able to hide this in the side chest, but he's still gotta beef those things up. This leaves Cedric in a pretty easy first. He's the most complete, has the better back when you consider detail, thickness, and everything, and he's shredded. He may be lacking a little size in the lower body, especially in the quad sweeps from the rear, but his hams are the best on stage. They're absolutely diced and the most developed. Same goes for the back. So finally, here's an easy win for Cedric. Cedric clean sweeps the back poses, making it 2 for 2 when we move to the rear lat spread. Now for overall width, I think Samson is nipping at Cedric's heels. He may in fact even be a bit wider, but Cedric has a couple things that Samson doesn't. For one, I like his hamstrings far better. Samson has a little more quad sweep, but again, like in the rear double, Cedric is the only one in this comparison to showcase properly shredded hams. The other two competitors don't even come close. The other major thing that Samson doesn't have is the raw thickness and the development of Cedric. Cedric just has two thick slabs of meat on either side of his spine. And again, he's very close, or at least right there next to Samson in terms of width, but he has the thickness to go along with it. So even if Samson is a hair wider, I'm putting Cedric in an easy first. He's got the width too, but the better back as a whole when accounting for the extra detail, and he takes the lower body due to the better hamstrings. I think it's becoming quite apparent at this point that between all three of these pictures, Cedric has the advantage of having more time in the oven. We can see that although he may not win every pose because of it, he does still bring a complete pose. And this is because he has the more developed physique. He has more years under his belt compared to the other guys, at least at this time. And we can clearly see that in both back poses. He's just on another level in terms of overall completeness and development. And that's why he's taking first in this shot. Next, you probably guess I'd be putting Samson in second based on how I've talked about him. And yeah, I am. He left detail on the table, so he's missing... He left detail on the table and some other things, but he still has the very important width factor going for him. He's wider than Andrew, at least based on this picture. I think Andrew's picture could be better, but still I think Samson is wider through and through. Samson also doesn't have the best hamstrings by a long shot, but he at least has hamstrings. We can't say the same for Andrew. Andrew just has too many gaps, too smooth, and he could probably fix his pose a little bit. He could probably do a little bit more to present that width a little bit better. We know he has it. He's super wide, and we saw it in the front lat spread. Unfortunately for Andrew though, those gaps and that poor posing add up to a third place finish for him. Moving to the side tricep, the first thing that catches my eye is in fact Andrew jacked. This is not entirely a good thing, however. Don't get me wrong, this pose is incredible. I like it the most out of everyone's here. But is it a side tricep? No, it's not. And the IFBB has already called him out on this before in a video that Tyler Mannion did where he was discussing the Texas Pro. So it's not just my own criticism, it's coming straight from the IFBB judges as well. Me and the official judges want to see a fair comparison. And when you change your pose up, we can't compare apples to apples. I get why Andrew is doing this. It downplays his lack of thickness from the side and highlights his amazing abs. I still appreciate what he's trying to do. Like I said, it is my favorite pose out of the bunch, but it's not a true side try. And that knocks him down here to begin with, but also just glancing at how thick the other two competitors are from the side and how good their triceps are, Andrew can't come back, and I have to put him in third. Now between Samson and Cedric, we can actually compare apples to apples, and there are a lot of similarities. Both guys have really thick horseshoes, but I think Cedric's is slightly larger, but more importantly, he has more separation here. That added separation may be what's making his triceps look bigger, but even if that's the case, that's a good thing. Bodybuilding is an illusion. At minimum, we can see more of his tricep than Samson's. Really, Samson's entire arm just again has that thick skin going on. The delt detail, the vascularity, the tricep separation just isn't as present on Samson compared to Cedric. I would give the pecs to Samson. The amount of thickness there is just crazy and he's not even really flexing them. Now the midsections are pretty close. Both guys are absolutely respectable, but I would give the slight edge to Cedric for a little more oblique detail and a trimmer waistline in general. And then finally going down to the lower body, it's pretty similar to the side chest. Samson has a little more sweep on the outer quad, but the thicker skin, and Cedric has the cleaner separation. Take your pick really. In the side chest, I had Cedric, but I'm actually going to give the slight edge to Samson in this pose. I think the angle favors him a little bit more. Overall, I think Samson's pose is good, but the lack of tricep definition and Cedric's added size are what wins the pose for Cedric. It's the side try after all, and I think it's fairly clear that Cedric has the better tricep, and is more than decent everywhere else. So Samson gets close in this one, but I'll have to stop him at second. In the abs and thighs, everyone is good. Everyone is even great. But there is a future Hall of Famer here in this pose, that of course being Andrew Jacked. Even if the other guys had 10 out of 10 poses, Andrew would still win. This is an 11 out of 10 pose and will go down in history as one of the best of all time. I don't really need to say much. This pose is perfect. With some of the best abs of all time and some absolutely great quads, this is to be expected and he will be known for years to come with this pose. Anyway, with Andrew firmly in first place, this leaves Cedric and Samson once again. Now with Samson, he's bending the rules a bit. He did do a head-on abs and thighs version at this Arnold Classic routine, but I think even with the slight dock I'm giving him, with this pose, it's still a way better pose for him in general than his head-on abs and thighs is. That pose is oddly underwhelming. Here though, he showcases the diced obliques and his abs actually look good here. And the quads are huge, but I wish he had more separation in that front one. There's that thick skin yet again coming back to haunt him, because what else can it be? He's literally flexing his quad to full contraction, but there's very little separation to speak of. So, good size in the quads, could use a little more separation, but up top he showcases full development and a diced midsection. In spite of twisting the rules, this is still a killer shot. Now, Cedric is doing the pose properly, but he has some flaws too. To my surprise though, his legs aren't one of them. I thought his legs have looked fairly narrow throughout this comparison up until this point, but they look great here. They look big, they look to be sweeping more here, and he's got some clean separation. The one knock I have on Cedric is the midsection, and it's just, I wish his abs were a bit neater. Still though, you can't say his core isn't developed. The abs are a good amount of chunky, the separations between them are pretty deep, and the obliques are coming out to play too. This is going to be another close one. I really like Samson's pose. In fact, I do like it over Cedric's. But I'm going with Cedric for the runner-up spot on this one. For one, he can hit it head on, which helps him a little, but I like the legs more and his abs are great too. He's not missing a pretty major factor like Samson is when it comes to quad separation. And Cedric's overall condition is better than Samson's, and that always helps someone in this pose. This is a narrow one yet again, but even though I do like Samson's pose more, I gotta give the nod to Cedric on this one for the overall polish. In the most muscular, every single guy actually brings a good pose, even Andrew Jacked. Still though, I gotta relegate him to third for one main reason. That main reason being he looks a little less muscular than the other two competitors. I was still very impressed about how well he does stack up in terms of muscularity, but when glancing at all three of them as a whole, I do think he is bringing less muscle. But still, he brings a really good pose. He hasn't found a variation to work for him ever besides the one you see here. This is the only time I feel that he actually executed the pose properly. He looks great in other poses, but the long and lanky limbs don't translate well to the most muscular. But here I think he cracked the code. He's not the most muscular to begin with, but he's still very full, and that makes up a lot of ground from the lack of muscle. And the details are abundant. The chest is yet again rippling with detail, and the legs are great too. But for a pose called the most muscular, I have to shift focus to the other two guys who are just straight up packing on more meat to their frames. Between Cedric and Samson, I'm not actually too sure who is the more muscular individual. Cedric packs more muscle on the arms and shoulders and measures up quite well on the pecs from this angle, but Samson is winning the lower body. At the end of the day though, I gotta give the pose to Cedric. I think his legs are still good, especially considering he's going up against Samson. Really, as long as Cedric can stay close, that's a win. I like Cedric's abs more too, and again, the pecs are very similar while Cedric wins the arms and delts. I do think the added height on Cedric would help him prevail over Samson on stage. This pose is all about looking imposing and commanding attention, and since these guys are close in terms of muscularity, that added height would surely help Cedric at least a little. Could I go back and forth? I'm really sounding like a broken record here, but yeah. However, Cedric again just looks more refined to me. So he's just as muscular but brings better polish. For that, I gotta give him the last pose of this comparison. So I did end up keeping track of the scores, but really, this was just for fun. I'll still go ahead and show you my scorecard though. I had Cedric in a clear first and Andrew and Samson neck and neck, but Andrew did take the second place spot by just 2 points. This was actually the most surprising thing about this comparison to me, but I say the same thing every time. Andrew has the better physique more than likely, to most people. Definitely the more aesthetic physique between the two, but Samson is the better bodybuilder all day long. He's more complete and more muscular, but gives up a little bit of shape to Andrew, but still has tremendous shape himself. That's why I'm actually going to go ahead and disagree with this outcome here. I think if these versions were beside each other, Samson would expose Andrew with that completeness and muscularity. Andrew still may get him in some shots like the front double and abs and thighs because those poses heavily favor the more aesthetic physiques, but Samson is bigger, more complete, had better conditioning, at least with these versions, and is still an aesthetic beast in his own right. If you're looking for absolutely pure art though, and not just bodybuilding aspects, then Andrew probably still pulls out a win, but I would actually grant Samson the runner-up spot in this comparison. But both gentlemen are just fighting to get out of that bottom spot because Cedric is so far ahead. He won 5 poses and was 5 points ahead of Andrew. Cedric is kind of like Samson. He's aesthetic, but he's also checking off a lot of those important bodybuilding aspects. Cedric has tremendous shape, but the deciding factor was how complete and muscular he still was. Andrew only has aesthetics at this point in time, and Samson has a little bit of both, but Cedric has both too, but it's expanding on what Samson is doing. You don't win 5 poses and only come in last in 1 pose without being a complete bodybuilder head to toe. You can't exactly say the same thing for Andrew nor Samson. So if you're looking for me to crown a winner, even though this comparison was quite casual and just for fun, I still think Cedric would be far ahead of these guys if they went head to head like this. So sure, he wins the comparison today. I think we could have seen this coming though. Cedric has left behind an impressive legacy to say the least. Arnold Classic champion, Olympian, Hall of Famer. Outside of winning an Olympia, Cedric has really done it all. But perhaps most importantly was Cedric's character. He was always so uplifting. From what I've heard from his friends and the people around him, Cedric had a pretty bad anxiety problem when it came to competing and getting on stage, which is crazy to think about. A 6 foot, 280 pound bodybuilder, someone who served his country bravely, was still consumed by nerves when it came down to perform his craft. There's some lessons to be learned there by just that fact alone. Don't judge a book by its cover. Anyone can suffer with anxiety, yada yada, but that's not really what I want to end this video with. Cedric felt poorly about himself, but oftentimes that can rub off on people. But Cedric was one of those in the minority who do the opposite. Cedric uplifted everyone around him, all the time. Cedric's career highlight was winning the 2017 Arnold Classic. This was his highest placing ever, and sure enough, it was an Arnold Classic victory. And what did he do during his victory speech? He asked all the other competitors to take the stage with him, and he commended all of them for their hard work and said he was humbled and glad to share the stage with them. That's a class act right there. And I know if he was still around, he'd be looking around at Andrew Jacked, Samson Dowda, and others, and he would be more than happy to pass the torch along to them. And that's going to do it for today's video. If you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you guys want to see more videos just like this one, be sure to hit that subscribe button too while you're at it. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality and great tasting supplements, go ahead and head over to SUPPS.com. The flavors they have over there are absolutely unmatched. If you want my personal recommendations, start with the Ring Pop flavored pre-workout and the Jet Puff marshmallow flavored protein. I've never had a pre-workout nor protein taste as good as those. Whatever you do put in your cart though, be sure to use my code DHudson5510 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code DHudson5510 at SUPPS.com. With all of that said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Gotta get that Lexia.